The gates of Ashford Estate had never been locked from the inside before tonight. Evelyn Brooks stood at the tall mahogany doors of the main hall, her travel bag pressed against her thigh, and listened to the mechanical groan of iron bolts sliding into place somewhere deep in the perimeter walls. Marcus Reed walked slowly down the grand staircase behind her. No hurry, no visible fury, just that particular stillness he wore when something had already been decided without her input. 9 years she had known this man. 9 years, and she had never once questioned the way a room shrank when he entered it. She was questioning it now. The storm outside cracked the sky open, and in the sudden white flash of lightning, she saw his face clearly. He wasn't angry. He was certain. That was so much worse. The morning it all unraveled began the way most catastrophic mornings do, ordinary to the point of deception. Evelyn had woken before dawn, as she usually did, in the East Wing bedroom that Marcus had renovated specifically for her 6 years ago when she had finally agreed to move from the guest cottage into the main house. He'd called it practical. Closer to the office, better security. She had called it comfortable and had not looked too closely at the distinction, because at 26, freshly shattered by grief and debt, practical had felt like the most romantic word in any language. The room was large and impeccably furnished. Raw linen curtains, wide plank walnut floors, a reading corner stacked with design journals and architecture folios she had accumulated over the years of working alongside Marcus. Nothing personal, really. No photographs on the walls, no trinkets from her former life in Portland, the life that had collapsed when her parents died within 18 months of each other and left behind not grief alone, but a house in foreclosure and a business bankruptcy that had taken Evelyn's own fledgling interior design practice down with it. There was nothing sentimental in this room because sentimentality required a self-assurance she had only recently, carefully, quietly, begun to rebuild. She lay in the early dark and listened to the estate breathe around her. Ashford was alive in the way that only old money properties ever truly are. A sprawling Georgian revival compound set on 94 acres in the western Virginia hills, 22 rooms in the main house, 3 auxiliary structures, formal gardens that required a full-time groundskeeping team, and the particular ambient hum of a place that had been running itself on high budget and low visibility for decades. Marcus had inherited it from his father at 31 and had spent the subsequent 15 years transforming it from a deteriorating historical property into what design publications called a masterwork of controlled opulence. Evelyn had contributed to that transformation. She had earned her place here. She kept reminding herself of that. She got up, dressed in the gray light, and went downstairs to the kitchen before the household staff arrived, which gave her approximately 40 minutes of privacy, a window she had been using for the past 3 weeks to make calls she did not want overheard. This morning she had one call to make. She sat at the marble prep island with her personal phone, not the work phone Marcus provided, but the one she had bought herself 8 months ago at a Verizon store in Richmond, paying cash, a small act of independence that had felt faintly absurd, and then increasingly necessary, and dialed the New York number from memory. Evelyn. Julian Hart's voice was warm and unhurried for 6:15 in the morning. She had liked that about him from their first conversation. The man operated on confidence instead of anxiety. "Tell me you have good news." "I have good news?" she said, keeping her voice low despite being alone in a kitchen the size of a small apartment. The habit of quietness had become so ingrained in her at Ashford that she sometimes forgot it wasn't a natural personality trait. "You're accepting." "I'm accepting." The silence that followed was the kind that contained genuine satisfaction rather than performance. Julian Hart was the founding partner of Hart Solis, an international design firm with primary offices in New York, Milan, and Singapore. They had been courting Evelyn for 4 months, a senior creative directorship, full autonomy over residential and hospitality projects in the Americas portfolio, compensation that would make her financially independent for the first time in her adult life. They had found her through her published work, 3 pieces she had released under her own name in trade journals over the past 2 years, work that Marcus had called a nice little side outlet, and that had apparently constituted, to the outside world, an unmistakable creative signature. It had been a shock, that phone call from Hart Solis, not because she doubted her own talent, She had stopped doubting that somewhere around year 4 at Ashford, when Marcus's clients kept specifically requesting her. But because she had begun to forget, in the comfortable machinery of this life, that talent was something you could take with you. "We'll need you in New York by the 1st of next month," Julian said. "There's a project already in motion, a hospitality renovation in the meatpacking district, and the client asked for you specifically after seeing the Meridian pieces." "I know. I've been preparing." She had been preparing in the evenings, after work hours, with a discretion she now recognized as practiced rather than accidental. She had learned discretion from Marcus. The irony sat in her chest like a stone. "And you've sorted the situation at your current position?" She looked at the kitchen doorway. Empty. The morning light had begun to pale the windows above the farmhouse sink. "I'm handling it," she said. What she did not say was that she had not told Marcus yet. What she did not say was that the idea of telling Marcus had begun to produce in her a specific physical response, a tightening in her throat, a fine tremor in her hands. That she was doing her best not to examine too directly, because examining it too directly meant acknowledging what it implied about the 9 years she had spent here. She ended the call, washed her coffee cup by hand, and went to the window. The estate grounds rolled out in the early light, manicured, symmetrical, beautiful. The perimeter fence was barely visible from here, its wrought iron swallowed by the old tree line that Marcus kept dense for privacy. It occurred to her, standing at that window, that she could not recall the last time she had left Ashford for any reason that wasn't business-related. She tried to think back. A supply sourcing trip to Richmond in February. A client site visit in Charlottesville the previous fall. Before that, a conference in D.C. that Marcus had attended alongside her. She tried to think of the last time she had gone somewhere alone. For no reason except wanting to. She could not. She turned away from the window and went to prepare for the day. Mad. Marcus was in the East Study by 7, already in his working clothes. Dark trousers, a charcoal collarless shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows with the particular precision of a man who does nothing carelessly. He was reviewing blueprints spread across the oak drafting table when Evelyn knocked and entered, carrying 2 mugs of coffee the way she had every morning for 7 years. He looked up, and the thing she always noticed first was that he was still handsome in a way that had outlasted any reasonable expectation. 51 years old, Marcus Reed carried his age the way a weapon carries use, visibly and without apology. Silver had come for his dark hair, and he had let it take everything. The lines at the corners of his eyes were deep enough to read like a record. He had the build of a man who had never stopped working with his body, even after his money made it unnecessary, and he moved through spaces with an authority that was less charisma than it was gravity. The specific pull of a man who had decided a long time ago that rooms belonged to him. He had been good to her. She needed to remember that first before she remembered anything else. "The Callaway materials came through," he said, accepting the mug without looking away from the blueprints. "I want to go over the Wing 3 specifications this morning before the contractor call at 10. "I cleared my morning for it," she said. This was true. She had cleared her morning because she had been clearing her mornings for Marcus for 7 years. She sat in the chair across from the drafting table and opened her notebook. They worked the way they always worked, efficiently, with the shorthand of long familiarity, finishing each other's technical sentences, flagging problems before they became arguments, moving through the spatial logic of a design problem with the ease of 2 people who had solved hundreds of them together. Marcus was brilliant at this. She had always given him that. His mind moved in 3 dimensions without effort, held structural and aesthetic considerations simultaneously, and he had taught her more about the architectural discipline of interior space in 9 years than her design degree had managed in 4. He had taught her a great deal. "The flooring spec needs to shift," she said, making a note. "The limestone they sourced is going to read too cold in the morning light on that eastern exposure. I'd go with the honed travertine, warmer undertone, still clean." "The cost difference?" "Negligible at this project scale." "Put it in the revision notes." He hadn't looked up. His pen moved across the blueprint with the confident illegibility of someone who knew no one else needed to read it. "Callaway is entertaining the idea of a guest cottage conversion as well. I want you to lead a site assessment next month." Next month she would be in New York. She wrote something in her notebook that meant nothing. "We'll see how the timeline looks," she said. He looked up then. Not because there was anything wrong with her answer. She used hedging language sometimes. They both did. It was part of the natural give and take of planning. But because Marcus had always had an instinct for the thing underneath the thing. It was what made him good at business. It was what had made him a good mentor once. Something wrong with the timeline? He asked. Nothing specific, just keeping flexibility built in. He held her gaze for 2 seconds longer than the question warranted, then looked back at his blueprints. The Callaway project represents a 7-figure engagement, he said, in the tone he used when he was explaining something for the record rather than for the conversation. I don't want flexibility built in. I want commitments. Understood, she said. She wrote something else that meant nothing. The weeks leading up to that morning had been accumulating in Evelyn's body the way weather accumulates, slowly and then all at once. She had come to Marcus at 26 in the wreckage of everything she had previously understood about herself. Her mother had died of a cardiac event with no warning, and her father, who had never been resilient but who had functioned adequately in the scaffolding of a long marriage, had collapsed inward after that and followed her to the grave 14 months later. Not dramatically, not by his own hand, but by the slow abdication of a man who had simply stopped wanting to continue. The business they had built together, a small Portland design firm that employed Evelyn and 2 other recent graduates, had not survived the legal complexities of the estate and the debt that came with it. Everything had come down at once. She had been 25, 26, living on a friend's couch in Virginia, applying for jobs she was overqualified for and not getting them, burning through the last of a savings account that wouldn't last 6 months. Marcus had appeared at an industry function she'd nearly not attended, a regional trade event in D.C. that a former professor had pushed her toward as networking, which you cannot afford to skip right now, Evelyn. She had gone in a dress she'd had since graduate school and spent 2 hours feeling like a ghost haunting someone else's professional life. And then Marcus Reed had stood beside her at the bar, ordered 2 glasses of something excellent without asking her preference, handed her one, and said, without preamble, "You're Evelyn Brooks. I've seen your portfolio. You've been underestimated." She had been startled enough to be honest. By who? Everyone in this room, he said, including yourself. He had offered her a position at Ashford within 3 weeks. Lead designer on a major renovation project, competitive salary, housing on site while the project ran. The project had expanded. The position had evolved. She had stayed. And Marcus had been everything he promised he would be. Rigorous, demanding, generous with knowledge, ferocious in his protection of her work against clients who undervalued it. He had fought for her billing rates with a personal investment that went beyond professional advocacy. When a male client had spoken over her in a meeting, Marcus had stopped the meeting cold and said, in a voice that contained no detectable heat, "Evelyn is the lead designer on this project. When she speaks, that is the design speaking. I'd recommend adjusting your listening accordingly." The client had adjusted. She had been grateful. She had been so profoundly, exhaustingly grateful. Gratitude, she understood now at 35, is its own kind of cage. Not because the things that produced it weren't real, but because gratitude, when it becomes the defining framework of a relationship, has a way of making the relationship's shape feel like the natural shape of things, like the way water fills a container and then simply is the container's shape, forgetting that water doesn't actually have a shape. She had forgotten, for a long time, what shape she was. Heart Solace had reminded her. She found the second email 3 days after the call with Julian, and that was when the texture of things began to shift in ways that made her skin feel wrong. She had gone to the administrative inbox on her work computer to pull an invoice reference, and she had seen it, a thread flagged and moved to a subfolder titled Correspondence Held for Review. The folder was not supposed to exist on her work machine. It was a routing designation used by Marcus's executive assistant for his own inbox management. Its presence on her computer suggested either a configuration error or that her work email was routing through a secondary review process she had never been told about. She sat looking at the screen for a full minute before she moved the mouse. The emails in the folder were a mixed range, nothing alarming individually. A message from her old Portland contact about a potential freelance referral. A follow-up from a headhunter she'd responded to 2 years ago and forgotten about. A note from her former professor asking whether she'd be attending a conference. None of it sensitive. None of it the Heart Solis correspondence, which she had been careful to conduct entirely through her personal phone. But none of it was Marcus's correspondence either. It was hers. She moved the mouse away from the folder, opened the invoice she'd actually come for, and closed the browser tab. Then she sat at the desk in the small project room off the main hall and listened to the estate hum around her and thought, with the careful, methodical clarity she had learned to use in this environment, about what it meant. It meant someone was reading her email. She had always known that Ashford ran on a certain level of operational surveillance. The security cameras, the access logs for the main gate, the monitored phone system for the house lines. These were standard features of a high-value private estate and had never felt invasive because they had never felt personal. They were about the property. They were about Marcus's assets. She was not an asset. Was she? She had put that question back in its box, carefully, and gone back to work. What? The day she was supposed to tell Marcus about New York, she didn't. The day she was supposed to tell Marcus the second time, she arrived at his study and found him in a phone call, standing with his back to the door, his voice carrying the low, flat register she associated with his most consequential conversations. She had retreated before he turned around. The third attempt had fallen apart because Helena, Marcus's executive assistant, had scheduled a client dinner with no apparent awareness that Evelyn had asked for evening availability to be left open, despite making the request directly to Helena herself. By the time she acknowledged, clearly and without the padding of alternate interpretations, that she was afraid to tell Marcus Reed that she was leaving, she had also acknowledged something else, that this fear had a history, that it had been building quietly for longer than the Heart Solis offer, that the specific quality of anxiety she felt when she imagined his face as she delivered the news was not the anxiety of a professional colleague worried about disappointing a good employer. It was the anxiety of someone who expected consequences and didn't yet know their shape. She called her friend Dana in Atlanta, the only person outside Ashford she had maintained any consistent contact with, and said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." "Okay," Dana said, with the wariness of someone who understood that this phrasing usually preceded difficult information. "When did you last visit me here?" "Evelyn? I'm not asking to make a point. I'm asking because I don't remember." Dana was quiet for a moment. "You've been saying come visit for years, but every time I try to lock in a date, something comes up on your end. A project conflict, a client weekend. Once you said Marcus had a personal concern that needed your attention. I stopped trying a couple years ago." She paused. "Are you okay?" "I'm making a change," Evelyn said. "I just need to sort the timing." "Does Marcus know?" She watched the light move through the east wing bedroom curtains. Outside, the groundskeeping team was working the formal garden, their movements visible as quiet industry through the French doors. "Not yet," she said. "Evelyn." Dana's voice had taken on a quality that Evelyn associated with the older sister Dana had always functioned as, which was a quality of careful danger, of someone who had something important to say and was choosing the gentlest possible weapon to say it with. "Why not yet?" "Because I'm being strategic about the timing." The pause Dana left was too long to be neutral. "Just be careful," Dana said finally, "and call me when it's done." Itiot. She told Marcus on a Thursday evening at the beginning of October, when the Virginia hills outside the estate were going gold and rust, and the air through the open windows of the main hall carried the first genuine cold of the season. She had chosen the main hall rather than his study, instinctively, for reasons she didn't want to examine. The hall was larger, less contained, had multiple exits. She told herself she chose it because it was neutral ground. She had prepared what she wanted to say with the same precision she gave to design presentations. Clear statement of intent, acknowledgement of existing context, forward-looking structure. She had rehearsed it. She felt ready. Marcus was coming down the main staircase when she said his name, and he stopped on the third step with the ease of a man who had never once in his life felt uncertain on a staircase. "I have something I need to tell you," she said. "I want to have it as a real conversation, so I'm asking for us to sit down." He looked at her for a moment. That particular quality of look he had, where his eyes moved through a rapid internal calculation that his face kept entirely private. And then he descended the remaining stairs and walked to the sitting room off the main hall, the one with the long leather sofas and the fire that was usually going this time of year. He sat. He waited. She stood. "I've accepted a position with Heart Solace," she said. "It's a senior creative directorship in New York. I've been in conversation with them for several months, and I've made my decision. I'm planning to transition out of Ashford at the end of next month." She had kept her voice even. She was proud of that afterward. Marcus sat with his forearms resting on his knees and his hands loosely together and his eyes on her. The fire moved beside him, and the room smelled of wood smoke and old leather. He did not speak for so long that the silence began to have its own pressure. "Julian Hart," he said finally. She said nothing. She had not told him Julian Hart's name. "I'm familiar with the firm," Marcus said, in the tone that meant he was familiar with everything and had been waiting for her to arrive at a conversation he had already been having privately. "It's a competent operation. Mid-tier international reach, decent portfolio, nothing remarkable." "I think it's a very strong firm," she said. "I'm sure you do." He looked at the fire. "When did this start?" "They reached out in the spring." "And you've been conducting these conversations how? On the work system?" The question's structure was interesting. Not have you been conducting these conversations on the work system, which would have been the normal formulation. When did this start, and how have you been conducting these conversations, both of which assumed she had been doing something that needed methodology to conceal. "On my personal phone," she said. He nodded, once, slowly, as though receiving a piece of information he was filing rather than learning for the first time. "A personal phone," he said. "You've been conducting a months-long process of removing yourself from this estate on a personal phone you haven't mentioned to me. I wasn't aware I owed you an accounting of my personal communications, Marcus." He looked at her then with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Not anger, because she had seen Marcus's anger and it was cold and precise, and this was something else. This was closer to grief, except with edges on it. Grief with teeth. "How long," he said quietly, "have you been planning to leave?" "I've been considering it for about a year. The firm reached out in the spring, and I thought it through carefully over several months." "A year." He stood, not abruptly, but with the deliberate weight of a man who needed to have his full height back. He walked to the window and stood with his back to her. Outside, the grounds lay in early evening shadow, the perimeter trees dark against a pale sky. "You have been in this house for 9 years, Evelyn, living under this roof, working alongside me every day, and for the past year you have been quietly arranging your departure." "I've been weighing an opportunity," she said. "That's what adults do when they receive them. Don't do that." He turned from the window, and whatever he was holding back was closer to the surface now. "Don't give me the controlled language. I've known you for 9 years. I taught you the controlled language." The truth of that landed in her chest with a weight she hadn't expected. "You're right that you taught me a great deal," she said. "That's exactly why I'm ready for this." Something crossed his face. She didn't have a name for it. It moved through his expression and was gone too quickly to catalog, leaving behind it a stillness that was somehow more unsettling than what had come before. "I want you to think about this very carefully before you make a final decision," he said. "I want you to take some time." "I've already made the final decision, Marcus. I've accepted the offer." "Then I want you to unaccept it." The room held very still. "Excuse me," she said. "I want you to contact Julian Hart and withdraw your acceptance." His voice was even. His face was even. Everything was even and absolutely wrong. Tell him a personal situation has changed your circumstances. He'll understand. These things happen. "I'm not going to do that. Evelyn, I am not going to do that." She kept her voice level by the same mechanism that keeps a building standing after the ground moves. All load-bearing walls, nothing decorative. "I have made a professional decision about my own career and my own life. You don't have the authority to reverse it." He looked at her for a long time, and then he said quietly, with something in his voice that she would spend months afterward trying to accurately describe to investigators and therapists and Dana at 2 a.m. on the phone, "I don't think you understand yet what I'm telling you." "Then explain it," she said. He crossed to the fireplace and stood with his hand on the mantel and his eyes on the flames and did not explain anything at all. We'll talk more tomorrow, he said. Dinner is at 7. You should rest. She had left the room because staying felt worse than leaving, and she had not understood until she was already walking away that she had been dismissed. The next 8 days happened inside a different Ashford. Nothing changed visibly. The staff moved through their schedules. Marcus maintained the surface of his working routine, the morning briefings, the client calls, the focused afternoon hours at the drafting table. He spoke to her at breakfast, made work-related requests throughout the day, asked her opinion on a material choice for the Callaway project with the same professional attentiveness he had always shown. But the perimeter cameras had been repositioned. She noticed it on the second day. 2 of the external units now covered the garden access path she typically used for her evening walks, and a third had been angled to cover the secondary gate on the north side of the property, which had previously been a camera blind spot she had never paid any attention to, and which now felt, with sudden clarity, like something she had been storing as useful information. By the 4th day, she noticed that her key card, the one she used for the estate's security access points, no longer worked on the North Wing service corridor. She had assumed an error and gone around without mentioning it to anyone. By the 5th day, 2 of the security team members she had never seen before were on rotation at the main gate. By the 6th day, she was running through options. Her personal phone still worked. She was careful about when she used it, stepping outside only at times that fit her established patterns. The morning walk, the late afternoon in the garden, moving to spots she had identified as likely outside camera range before making calls. She updated Julian Hart with a brief message that said she was managing a transitional situation and would confirm final logistics within the week. Julian, to his credit, said only that he was available whenever she needed him. She called Dana from the East Garden on a Wednesday afternoon with the wind moving through the boxwood hedges around her and said, "I need you to do something for me." "Tell me," Dana said immediately, with no preamble. "I need you to have someone check in on me if I don't contact you by next Sunday. I need you to note this date and time and who I'm talking to if I don't check in." The silence on Dana's end lasted exactly as long as it needed to. "Evelyn, are you safe right now?" "I'm in the garden," she said. "I'm fine right now. I just need this as a precaution." "I'm calling the police." "Dana, don't. Not yet. It would make things harder. I just need the check-in." She paused. "I need someone outside this property to know where I am." "I've always known where you are," Dana said, and the weight in her voice was years of knowing and never saying. "I've always known exactly where you are." Evelyn stood in the garden and let that sit for a moment. "Sunday," she said. "If you don't hear from me." "I'll hear from you before Sunday," Dana said, "because you're going to get out of there before then." The storm came on a Thursday night in late October. It had been building since early afternoon, the sky going wrong colors over the western ridge, the barometric pressure doing something unpleasant that Evelyn could feel in her teeth. By 6, the wind was pushing through every imperfection in the estate's 100-year-old facade, and the lights in the main house had flickered twice. By 8, the rain was horizontal. Marcus had said nothing about the storm, only that dinner would be at the usual hour and that she should come to the main dining room. She had eaten with him in the formal dining room for the first time in several years. They typically used the smaller breakfast room, which suited the working rhythms of the household, and the formality of it felt chosen rather than circumstantial. The long mahogany table with its 16 available chairs and only 2 place settings, one at each end. The candlelight, which Helena had apparently arranged. The wine, which Marcus had selected himself, and which was the kind of wine opened for arrivals, not departures. He had been pleasant at dinner, attentive. He had asked her about a material sourcing problem she'd been working through with a contractor in Charlottesville, and he had offered a solution that was genuinely useful, and the familiarity of it, of sitting across from this man who knew her work so well, who had shaped so much of what she knew and was capable of, sat in her chest like an ache she couldn't afford to feel right now. "The meridian pieces were excellent," he said, midway through the second course. He said it conversationally, examining his wine glass. "The ones you published." She looked at him. "I've been told the Singapore office at Heart Solace specifically requested you on the basis of those pieces," he continued, still in the same easy register. "Interesting. I wasn't aware they ran that far. He was telling her he had investigated. He was telling her this casually, as though it were normal, because to him, apparently, it was. They did, she said. You're talented, he said. I've always said that. You have. I wonder sometimes. He set down his glass. The candlelight held his face in warm and flickering light. The storm outside was working on the windows in waves. Whether I've served that talent well enough, whether the work you've done here has received the recognition it deserves. It's received what you've allowed it to receive, she said. He looked at her. My name hasn't been on the primary client communications for 5 years, she said, because the wine was doing something to her precision controls that she normally kept fully engaged. Our work is credited jointly in publications, but in client relationships I've been Marcus Reed's associate, or our lead designer, without specification. The Meridian pieces were the first things I published under my own name in 2 years. Those administrative details can be adjusted, he said, without heat. They're not administrative details, Marcus. They're the details that constitute a career. He was quiet. Outside, the storm drove a hard fist of rain against the east-facing windows. The lights flickered. Stay, he said. One word, no qualification. I'm not having this conversation again. Evelyn. He stood, and the quality of his movement had changed from the contained deliberation of dinner to something more direct. I need you to hear me, not as an employer, not as a mentor. I am asking you as the person who... He stopped. He looked at the wall to his right with the expression of a man rewriting something in real time. As the person who has been the most important constant in your life for 9 years. You have been important to me, she said carefully. That doesn't translate to the right to determine where I go. It's not about rights, he said. Nothing I'm saying is about rights. Then what is it about? It's about what this is, he said. He gestured at the table, the room, and she understood he meant the estate, the 9 years, all of it. What it's always been. The lights went out. Not the flicker of a near miss, but the full clean cut of a tripped circuit, and the room dropped into pure candlelight, which felt dramatically appropriate and entirely unplanned. In the shifting orange light, Marcus's face was something close to naked in a way that the even illumination of normal evenings never showed. What has it always been? She said. He came around the end of the table. Not rapidly, not with aggression, with purpose, which was a different and more complicated thing. He stopped at the corner nearest to where she was seated and looked at her, and the candlelight made shadows of everything and light of the essential things, and his face held something she had glimpsed occasionally in the past 9 years, and filed away under reasons I don't need to examine this. I've watched you become everything I believed you would be, he said. Every year, everything you've learned, everything you've built. I've been here for all of it. Don't you understand that I am not capable of watching you walk out of this house? Her chair scraped back and she stood, because she needed to be vertical. Marcus, I know how this sounds, he said, and his voice was lower now and very controlled, which was its own form of frightening. I know what conclusions you are currently arriving at. I want you to understand that none of this has appeared to me suddenly. I have understood my own feelings about you for a long time. I have also understood that expressing them directly would not have served you at the stage you were in. He paused. You needed to become who you are before you could understand what I'm telling you. The storm was fully violent now. Outside the curtained windows, the world had become wind and water and darkness. You need to step back, she said. I need you to stay. Marcus, I need you to step back. He stepped back. He gave her that. He crossed his arms and looked at her from a distance of 6 feet and said, I'm not finished. You need to be finished for tonight, she said. I'm going to my room. The gates are locked, he said. She stopped. The exterior gates, he said. They were locked at 9 o'clock this evening, a security precaution in the storm. He held her gaze. I'm not going anywhere tonight, Evelyn, and neither are you. We have time to have this conversation properly. The locks. She had heard them. An hour ago, through the thick walls of the estate, she had heard the sound of the exterior gates engaging, and she had told herself it was the storm protocols, because she had told herself a lot of things over 9 years that she was currently revising. Her phone was in her room, her personal phone, with Dana's number and Julian's number, and the number she had saved 3 days ago under a contact name she had labeled electrician because she needed it to be invisible, the federal investigator who had called her. He had found her through Julian Hart, or rather, through a contact of Julian's who had been following Marcus Reed's financial activities for 18 months. He had been brief and professional and had said, "We believe you have relevant information, Miss Brooks, and we also believe you may not know the extent of what you're involved in." He had given her his number and told her to use it when she was ready, and he had said, "Sooner is better than later," and she had put his number in her phone under electrician and had not yet used it. She looked at Marcus, who stood in the candlelight with his arms crossed and his eyes on her, and the full weight of 9 years between them, and she said the only thing she could think of that wasn't a lie. "Okay," she said, "we'll talk tomorrow." She watched him calculate that, watched him weigh it against whatever framework he'd been operating inside, watched him decide on the basis of 9 years of her accommodation that she meant it. "Tomorrow," he said, "we'll talk properly." She nodded. She walked out of the dining room with her spine straight and her hands loose and the whole estate locked around her like a closed fist. She made it to the main hall before she realized her hands were shaking. She pressed them against her thighs and kept walking. She was halfway up the staircase when she heard it, a sound below her, from the direction of Marcus's study. A filing cabinet. The particular slide and close of the heavy, fire-rated cabinet he used for documents that he referred to as operational rather than business. She had seen it open 3 or 4 times in 9 years. He always positioned himself between it and the room when he opened it. She stood on the staircase and listened to the sound of him filing something away or taking something out, and she thought about the folder on her work computer. She thought about the cameras repositioned along the garden path. She thought about the new security staff at the main gate and the key card that no longer worked in the north wing corridor, and the federal investigator who had said sooner is better than later. She thought about the sound of gates locking. She went to her room. She retrieved her phone from beneath the mattress where she'd been storing it for 4 days. She sat on the edge of the bed in the dark while the storm beat at the windows, and she scrolled to the contact labeled electrician, and her thumb hovered over the call button for a long time. She pressed it. It rang once. On the second ring, in the walls above the kitchen, directly above the passage she used to reach the east wing, she heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving toward her door. She had called the federal investigator at 11:47 at night in a locked estate in the middle of a storm. The footsteps stopped outside her door. The phone connected, and someone knocked. The knock came again. 3 beats, measured, patient. The knock of a man who had never needed to hurry because doors had always opened for him, eventually. Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed with the phone pressed to her ear and the connection live and her thumb already moving to kill the screen's brightness. The voice on the other end, Agent Callum Reyes, federal investigator, whose number she had stored under electrician, said her name once, low and immediate, as though he'd been waiting with his hand on his own phone. "I'm here," she said, barely sound at all. "Someone's at my door." "Don't open it yet. Is it locked?" She looked at the door. The bedroom lock was a simple interior bolt, the kind installed for privacy in a house that had never been designed with confinement in mind. She crossed the room in 4 steps and slid it home. "It is now," she said. "Good. Don't hang up." The knock came a 3rd time. "Evelyn?" Marcus's voice through the door was calm, and the calm was doing something to her breathing. "I saw your light. I wanted to make sure you were settled in for the night." She stood with her back flat against the wall beside the door and the phone against her collarbone, not the ear, muffled, but connected. "I'm fine," she said, at a volume that would carry through the door. "I'm getting ready to sleep." A pause that lasted 4 seconds, which she counted. "The storm's taken out one of the backup generators," he said. "If the main power goes, you'll want the flashlight in the bedside drawer. I had Helena stock all the rooms." "I know where it is. Thank you." Another pause. Different quality this time. The pause of a man deciding whether to push or to save it. "Sleep well," he said. She listened to his footsteps recede down the hall. Slow, unhurried. The footsteps of a man who didn't need to confirm anything tonight because he already knew where she would be in the morning. Because the gates were locked and the perimeter was watched, and 9 years of dependency had taught him, accurately, that Evelyn Brooks did not make reckless moves. She had never given him reason to believe she would start. She brought the phone back to her ear. "He's gone," she said. "Okay." Reyes's voice was steady in a way she recognized as professional rather than effortless. A man who had learned to sound unhurried because urgency spread to whoever you were trying to help, and that rarely made things go better. "How many exits does your room have?" "One door, French doors to a balcony, second floor, east side." "What's below the balcony?" "The formal garden, stone patio." "Too high to drop safely." "What about the north wing? You mentioned the service corridor." "My keycard was deactivated 4 days ago." The silence on his end was brief and told her he was recalibrating. "There are tunnels under that property, Miss Brooks. I need you to listen to me carefully." She did not sleep. She lay on top of the covers with her shoes still on and the phone dark on the mattress beside her, Reyes having made her promise to rest and to call back before dawn. And she stared at the plaster ceiling and ran through everything she knew and everything she should have known and the distance between those two territories, which turned out to be enormous. Reyes had given her 12 minutes of compressed information before the conversation's risk calculus demanded she end the call. What she had in those 12 minutes was this. Marcus Reed had been under federal investigation for financial crimes for 19 months. The scope of it was bigger than Evelyn had imagined from the fragments she'd been piecing together. Not just fraud and regulatory violations, but a systematic pattern of asset concealment, leveraged across a network of shell structures tied to Ashford's accounts, and at least 3 former business associates who had attempted to come forward and had subsequently disappeared from the public record with a thoroughness that the investigators' language called suspicious, and that Evelyn's body translated more directly. She thought about Thomas Greer, a business partner of Marcus's from the early years before Evelyn had arrived at Ashford, whose name she had seen referenced in a memo 3 years ago and had asked Marcus about once. Marcus had said, without changing his expression in any way she could recall now as unusual, that Thomas and he had parted company over a disagreement about the direction of the estate's portfolio. That Thomas was somewhere in the Pacific Northwest now, doing something in real estate. She had accepted that. She had accepted so many things. The ceiling above her was the same ceiling it had always been. The room was the same room. The estate breathed around her with the same humidity and timber and stone smell it had always carried, and she lay inside it and felt the specific vertigo of understanding that a place you thought you knew has been something else all along. Not the place itself, but the story you'd been told about it. And the difference between those two things is always, when you finally see it, catastrophically simple. She'd been the story. She'd been the detail that made the whole picture look like something safe set. Morning arrived gray and wet, the storm having degraded to a persistent sullen rain that darkened the estate's stone exterior and turned the formal gardens into a system of shallow lakes. Evelyn came downstairs at her usual time, with her face composed and her overnight bag left exactly where it had been before last night's dinner, visible, in the corner of the bedroom, not moved toward the door. A small signal. "I am not running. I am still here." Marcus was in the breakfast room. He looked up from his coffee when she entered, and the thing she noticed first was that he was wearing what she had always thought of as his resolution clothes. The dark-fitted shirt, the charcoal trousers, the watch he wore on days when he expected his authority to be tested. He had dressed for something. "Coffee's fresh," he said. She poured herself a cup because not pouring herself a cup would be a deviation from routine, and she had decided somewhere around 3 in the morning that deviation from routine was the only thing she couldn't afford today. "How did you sleep?" he asked. "Fine," she said. "The storm kept me up a little. It's supposed to break by afternoon." He set down his cup. His hands were steady, which told her nothing useful because his hands were always steady. "I want to continue our conversation from last night." "All right," she said. She sat down. She wrapped both hands around her mug. She looked at the man across the breakfast table who had been a fixed point of her existence for nearly a decade and made herself see him with the full clarity she'd been spending 9 years avoiding. Marcus Reed had saved her. That part was real, and nothing that had come after it unmade it. When she had been 26 and the floor had dropped out, he had extended a hand and the hand had been genuine. She believed that. She would continue to believe it until evidence proved otherwise, because the alternative, that the original act of rescue had been strategic from the beginning, was a cruelty too architectural in its scope for her to hold steadily this early in the morning. But the man who saved her and the man who had redirected her email and repositioned cameras to watch the north gate and locked the exterior gates of his property on the night she tried to have an adult professional conversation were not the same construction. They were what happened when a genuine impulse, protection, outlasted its object and became something else, something that needed to own the thing it couldn't bear to lose. She understood it. She refused to forgive it. "I've been thinking about what you said last night," she offered. Marcus's eyes tracked her with the particular focus she'd always interpreted as attentiveness and was currently revising. "And? I think there are things we've never said to each other that are overdue." He was quiet for a moment. Then something in his posture loosened, fractionally, in the way of a man who has been waiting for an opening and has just been handed one. "I've been trying to say them for a long time." "I know," she said. "I think I've known for a while. I didn't let myself look at it directly." "Why not?" She took a sip of her coffee. Outside, the rain worked on the garden. Somewhere in the east wing, she could hear Helena beginning her morning sweep of the administrative office. "Because it would have complicated everything," she said. "And the work was important to me." "The work was important to you," Marcus repeated, and there was a flatness in it, a slight dangerous recession. "The work, and this place, and you," she said. "All of it was important." The way she said it, past tense, not emphatic, not cruel, just accurate, landed in the room with the weight of something conclusive, and she watched him hear it. "You've made up your mind," he said. She didn't answer. "Look at me," he said. She looked at him. "Tell me the truth," he said. Not the professional framing, not the controlled language. "Are you afraid of me right now, Evelyn?" The question was its own kind of trap, and also, she thought, genuinely meant. There were layers in Marcus Reed, and the terrifying thing was that most of them were real. The mentor who had fought for her billing rate was real. The strategist who had redirected her email was real. The man sitting across this breakfast table who genuinely needed, the answer to this question to be no. He was real, too. "I think you're acting from a place of fear," she said. "I think when people you care about move toward the door, you stop thinking about what they need and start thinking about the door." His jaw moved slightly. "That's not an answer. It's the most honest thing I can offer you right now." The silence that followed had a different quality than the ones before it. Less pressure, more weight. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "I know," she said, because she needed him to believe she believed it, and because some part of her, the 9-year part, still wasn't entirely certain he was wrong. "Then why the locked door last night?" She looked at her coffee. "Privacy." He accepted that. Or he performed accepting it, and she accepted his performance of accepting it, and they ate breakfast in the particular silence of two people who have identified the exact shape of the lie between them and decided by mutual unspoken agreement to leave it there for now. She found the maintenance tunnel entrance by accident that same afternoon, and she would never know afterward whether to call that luck or something she'd been moving toward all along. She was in the sub-basement storage level, retrieving archived project files that Marcus had asked for, a reasonable task, not a pretext, because she had decided that the safest posture was complete normalcy until she was ready, when she noticed the door. It was behind a shelving unit. Not hidden. The shelving unit wasn't fixed to the wall, but positioned with the subtle thoughtlessness of furniture placed by someone who wanted something behind it to be inconvenient rather than invisible. Evelyn had been in this storage level dozens of times, and had never pushed the unit aside because there had never been any reason to. She pulled it 6 inches from the wall and saw the door behind it, steel-framed, old, with a lever handle and a combination pad that was clearly a later addition to an older mechanism. The pad's LED indicator glowed green. She did not open it. She pushed the shelving unit back exactly to its original position, retrieved the files she'd come for, and went back upstairs. In the east garden, in the rain, with her phone at her ear, she described the door to Reyes in a low, careful voice. Green indicator means the lock is either defaulted open or someone's been through it recently, he said. Don't try the door yet. I need to know your timeline for the next 24 hours. Marcus is meeting with his estate lawyer tomorrow morning, she said. His calendar shows it as a 9 o'clock at the main house, which means the lawyer comes here, not the other way around, which means the gates will open tomorrow morning for the lawyer's vehicle, Reyes said. Yes, and then close again. Yes. The lawyer typically stays 2 to 3 hours. That's a narrow window. He was quiet for a moment, and she could hear the quality of his thinking in it. Not hesitation, but construction. The files under the estate, Miss Brooks. One of Marcus Reed's former associates, a man named Thomas Greer. We believe he left documentation in those tunnels before he disappeared. Physical evidence he couldn't digitize safely. We've been trying to access this property for 14 months. She stood in the rain and let that information arrange itself. He knew there were tunnels, she said. He built additional access to them in the estate's first renovation cycle, yes. We've had the architectural records for 18 months. What we haven't had is anyone on the inside who could reach them. The rain was cold on the back of her neck. You called me because of Julian Hart, she said, but you already knew about me. A pause. We've been watching the estate for a long time, Ms. Brooks. When Hart Solis reached out to you, it was an opportunity. Julian is a former colleague of Greer's. He knew what Greer left behind, and he knew you were the one person who might be able to reach it. She absorbed this. Julian had known. His firm had reached out not only because of her design work, though the work was real, she had to believe the work was real, but because she was an access point. She had been the key to the door. She just hadn't known which door. How many people are watching this property right now? She asked. Enough, Reyes said. The moment you're outside that perimeter, we have you. But we can't come in. Not without evidence that constitutes grounds for a warrant that won't get thrown out, and not without risking destruction of the documents if Marcus sees us coming. She looked at the estate rising above the garden in the gray afternoon light. Its Georgian proportions, its stone and symmetry, its 94 acres of beautiful, controlled space, the life that had been offered to her as shelter and had become something else by increments so gradual she hadn't felt them accumulate. Tell me what to look for, she said. She was back inside before Marcus returned from the East study at 5, and she was sitting in the project room with her work laptop open and a material specification on the screen and her hands perfectly still when he looked in. How are the archive files? He asked. Exactly what you need, she said. I'll have the Callaway notes reorganized by morning. He looked at her for a moment, looked at the laptop screen, which showed what it was supposed to show, looked at her hands. Helena will have dinner at 7, he said. I'll be there. He left. She waited until his footsteps had moved the full length of the main hall before she let herself breathe through her mouth. The Callaway files were going to take her 2 hours at most. That left 5 hours before dinner. She had already noted that Marcus spent his late afternoons in the West study, which had no sightline to the sub-basement entry from the main hall staircase. She had already calculated that Helena left the administrative office at 5:30, and the kitchen staff arrived at 6:15, which created a window of 45 minutes in which the ground floor interior of the main house ran on minimal human traffic. She had been paying attention to this estate's rhythms for 9 years. He had built his sense of security on the assumption that the most intimate knowledge of Ashford's operational patterns resided in his own head. He was wrong about that. She saved the work file, closed the laptop, and allowed herself one moment, one complete private moment, of something that was not fear and not courage, but the specific cold clarity of a person who has identified the only possible path forward and is checking their footing before they take the first step. Then she stood up, tucked the phone into her waistband at the small of her back, and moved toward the main hall staircase with her chin level and her expression wearing the particular composition of a woman who is going, simply, to retrieve something she left in the kitchen. She had a tunnel to find. And somewhere in its walls, left by a man who had trusted the wrong person and lost everything, were the documents that would make Marcus Reed's careful empire come apart at its most load-bearing joint. The estate hummed around her. The rain fell steadily against the windows. Upstairs, somewhere above the project room ceiling, Marcus Reed moved through his afternoon with the patience of a man who believes the thing he needs most is already secured. He had 4 hours left to believe that. The sub-basement smelled of stone and old water, and the particular metallic cold of a space that hasn't held warmth in years. Evelyn moved through it the way she moved through everything now. Deliberately, with the practiced steadiness of someone who has made a decision and is executing it before the part of her brain responsible for second-guessing can catch up. The 40-minute window between Helena's departure and the kitchen staff's arrival had opened exactly on schedule. She had walked down here at 5:34 carrying an empty archive box as cover, and she had not allowed herself to hesitate at the bottom of the stairs. The shelving unit moved easier than she expected. 6 inches? 10? Enough. The door behind it was exactly as she'd left it. Steel frame, lever handle, the combination pad glowing its patient green. She pressed the lever and it gave without resistance, swinging inward on hinges that were better maintained than anything in this storage room had any right to be. The tunnel beyond was narrow and lit by a string of utility bulbs, old incandescent, casting light the color of old paper. The floor was poured concrete, smooth and dry. The ceiling cleared her head by 4 inches. She stood in the doorway and listened to the hum of the estate infrastructure above her. Water pipes, electrical conduit, the low mechanical breath of the HVAC system. And then she went in. Reyes had told her what to look for. Greer had been a meticulous man, the kind whose compulsiveness had made him valuable to Marcus and ultimately dangerous to himself. He wouldn't have hidden documents in a way that required luck to find. He would have hidden them in a way that required knowing what you were looking for. She walked for approximately 40 feet before she found the junction, the tunnel branching into a T, left toward what her internal compass told her was the north wing, right toward the estate's utility core. She went right, because Reyes had said the utility core, because Greer had been an engineer before he'd been a businessman, because engineers trust infrastructure. The access panel was behind the secondary water shutoff. She almost missed it, not because it was concealed, but because it looked exactly like what it was. A maintenance hatch, and her eye had been trained by the search to look for something hidden rather than something simply waiting. She opened it, and inside, behind the shut-off housing, wrapped in an oilcloth that had kept it dry through however many years it had been sitting here, was a package the size of a hardcover book. She did not open it in the tunnel. She wrapped it under her arm inside her sweater, closed the hatch, walked back through the junction, back through the door, repositioned the shelving unit, and was up the stairs and in the project room with the door closed and the package on the table in front of her before her hands began to shake. She let them shake. She had earned it. Then she opened the oilcloth. Thomas Greer had been thorough in the way that a man documents things when he believes the documentation is the only insurance policy that might keep him alive. The package contained printed records, financial statements, wire transfer logs, correspondence between Marcus and a network of holding companies whose names Evelyn didn't recognize, but whose structural logic she could follow because she had spent 9 years watching Marcus build things. She understood how he constructed systems. She understood how each layer served the one above it and obscured the one below. She also understood, working through the first dozen pages with her phone camera running, that what she was looking at was not a side enterprise or contained fraud. It was the skeleton of the actual business, the real financial architecture beneath the estate's legitimate face. And the legitimate face, the design work, the client commissions, the published projects, the reputation she had helped build was the surface that made the skeleton invisible, which meant her work had done that. Her name, her talent, the clean professional credibility of Evelyn Brooks had been part of what made Marcus Reed look like exactly what he claimed to be. She sat with that for exactly as long as she could afford to, which was not long. She photographed every page. She sent the photographs to Reyes in a compressed file with a message that said, "Found Greer's package. Full contents attached." She received back, in under 2 minutes, "Do not move until I tell you. Do not let Reed see those documents or know they've been moved." She rewrapped the oilcloth, replaced the package exactly as it had been, and was sitting at her laptop with a material specification open on the screen when she heard Helena's voice from the main hall, 30 minutes earlier than expected. She closed the project room door, managed her breathing, and did not move. Fatigue. Dinner was a performance of the highest order, and she gave it everything she had. Marcus was in a different register tonight, less the contained authority of the breakfast table, more something that wanted to read as warmth but had the structural properties of a test. He poured the wine himself. He asked about her afternoon with what seemed like genuine interest. He talked about the Callaway project with the ease of a man sketching a shared future, using we and our with the casual frequency of someone installing furniture. She matched him note for note. She talked about the archive files. She mentioned a material substitution she was considering for the East Wing specification. She asked a question about the lawyer visit in the morning, framed as logistics, phrased as engagement, and watched him answer it without any visible awareness that she had just confirmed the window she needed. "Hargrove will be here at 9, Marcus said. "Estate business. Shouldn't run past 11. "I'll keep the morning clear," she said. He looked at her across the table with the candlelight between them again, and for a moment the expression on his face was something she couldn't fully process. Not satisfaction exactly, not relief, but the look of a man who has been holding tension in his body for a very long time and has just released a fraction of it. "You seem steadier tonight," he said. "I've been thinking," she said, "about what we discussed. About a lot of things." He nodded slowly. He was going to let her come to him. He had the patience of a man who has decided the outcome is already determined and the only variable is time. She hated that she had taught him to believe that about her. She excused herself at 9, went upstairs, locked her door, and called Reyes. "Tomorrow morning is your window," she said, without preamble. "Lawyer arrives at 9. Gate opens. You said enough people." "We'll be positioned before 7, Reyes said. "Ms. Brooks, I have to be direct with you. What you sent me this afternoon, Greer's documents, they're what we needed, but they don't give us enough for immediate arrest without the originals in hand. We need the physical evidence." I put it back. "I know, and I need it to stay there until we have grounds to enter the property legally, which the photographs have now given us, but which requires time," she said. "Hours, not days. The warrant is moving, but I need you to stay inside that house and stay calm until we're in position." She looked at the ceiling of the East Wing bedroom, 12 feet of plaster above her, 22 rooms around her, 94 locked acres of property. "How many hours?" she said. "Dawn at the latest." She hung up, set her phone on the pillow beside her, and closed her eyes. She did not sleep. The knock at 3 in the morning was not Marcus. She was awake when she heard it, had been awake the entire time, running contingencies and listening to the estate's breathing, and the knock was wrong from the first beat. Too tentative, too close to apologetic. Marcus had never knocked on a door in his life with apology in his hands. She crossed to the door and said, "Who is it?" "It's Helena." A pause. "I'm sorry to bother you. I need to speak with you." Evelyn stood with her hand on the bolt and made the calculation in under 2 seconds. Helena Marsh, 53 years old, executive assistant at Ashford Estate for 11 years. The 2 years before Evelyn's arrival and every year since. Precise, loyal, professionally invisible in the way of someone who had made a philosophy of discretion. Evelyn had always liked her, in the baseline way of two women in a professional environment who understand each other's position without discussing it. She opened the door. Helena was in a robe, her gray hair down, her face carrying the specific distress of someone who has been awake for a long time and has finally made a decision they don't feel good about. She looked at Evelyn with eyes that held something complicated and said, "Can I come in?" Evelyn stepped back. Helena came inside. Evelyn closed the door and did not bolt it. "What's wrong?" Evelyn said. Helena looked at the floor for a moment, then she looked up. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to understand that I want you to understand that I didn't know the full scope of it, not until recently." Evelyn went very still. "The email review protocol," Helena said. "On your work machine, I set that up." The room reorganized around that sentence. "Marcus asked me to," Helena continued quickly, in the voice of a woman who has been rehearsing this and needs to get through it before her nerve fails. 2 years ago. He said it was a security measure for the estate's proprietary project data. He said your machine had been flagged by the IT system and there was a vulnerability. I thought..." She stopped. I thought it was what he said it was. And then, Evelyn said, and then 3 months ago, he asked me to flag any external contact that mentioned design firms, career opportunities, or New York. Helena's voice was steady, but the steadiness cost her something visible. And I did it, because I've worked for this man for 11 years, and I told myself it was still about security. She looked at Evelyn directly. And then tonight, I found something I wasn't supposed to find, and I understood what the security was actually protecting. What did you find? Evelyn said. His study, the fire-rated cabinet. Helena reached into the pocket of her robe and produced a folded piece of paper. She held it out. He left it on top of the files when he was called away from his desk this afternoon. I was filing his afternoon correspondence, and I saw it. I put it back, and then I took it back out again. She paused. I've been sitting with it for 6 hours. Evelyn took the paper. It was a printed schedule, formatted with the clean precision of Marcus's administrative templates, the ones he used for estate operations and client timelines and all the organized machinery of his professional life. At the top, a date, 3 days from now. Below it, an itemized sequence of events rendered in the flat functional language of logistics. It took her 8 seconds to read it and understand what she was reading. At 9 a.m., Hargrove would arrive. The estate's legal instruments would be amended. At 11, a secondary ceremony, the word Marcus had used was ceremony, would be conducted in the estate's library with 2 additional witnesses. Evelyn didn't recognize, but whose roles in the document were designated as legal signatories. The instrument being signed was a private partnership agreement, binding and structured in terms she recognized from the estate's financial architecture, that named Evelyn Brooks as co-owner and permanent residential partner of Ashford Estate, with transfer restrictions that would require her legal consent and a waiting period of 5 years to reverse. She was being documented into this house, not by force, by paper, by the clean, invisible architecture of legal instruments that would make leaving not illegal but catastrophically complicated, that would tie her name and her financial identity to this property, to Marcus's holdings, to the entire structure whose real shape she had seen in Greer's documents 4 hours ago. Once her name was on those instruments, she was not a captive. She was a co-conspirator. Whether she signed them or not was apparently not the operative question, because the second page of the document indicated that Marcus's power of attorney, granted to Hargrove under an existing legal arrangement Evelyn had not known about, included authority to execute documents on behalf of estate partners in cases of their incapacity or absence. She was already in the document. She just hadn't been told. Helena, she said, and her voice came out flat and very clear, the voice she used when she was operating past fear into something colder. How long have you known about the financial structure of this estate? The real one. Helena's face moved through several things in rapid sequence. Long enough, she said finally, and you stayed. I stayed, Helena said, in a voice that had stopped performing apology and arrived at something honest and not particularly pleasant. I stayed because I have a pension tied to this property and a non-disclosure that would cost me everything I have if I violated it. And because for a long time I told myself that what Marcus was doing wasn't my business. She looked at Evelyn directly. And then you arrived and I watched you, and I kept telling myself that, and I'm telling you now because I can't tell myself that anymore. Evelyn looked at the document in her hands. She thought about Reyes waiting outside the perimeter with his warrant moving through a system that ran on hours. She thought about the tunnel beneath the sub-basement. She thought about Thomas Greer, who had trusted and documented and disappeared. She thought about what it meant that Helena had known, had been an instrument, however self-deceived, of the surveillance, had flagged her emails, had scheduled away her protected evening, had been, for 11 years, the operational engine of a man whose real business she had chosen, across a long and comfortable period of willful blindness, not to examine. The woman in front of her was offering a hand. The hand was late. The hand was also, possibly, the only one available. The lawyer arrives at 9, Evelyn said. Yes. The gates opened for him. Helena was quiet for a moment, then, the access code for the service gate on the north perimeter has not been changed since last year. I know this because I manage the security rotation schedules and the update is overdue, and I haven't filed the request. She paused. The code is 7491. Evelyn looked at her. The north gate is not on the main security camera loop, Helena said. It's on a secondary monitor in the east guardhouse. The overnight guard checks it on 30-minute intervals. The next check is at 3:45. It was 3:17. Helena, Evelyn said. If you're telling me this and he finds out. I'm aware, Helena said. She looked at the wall, then back. I have a sister in Knoxville. I have a car in the staff garage. I have been aware for longer than I'm going to admit out loud that there was going to be a night when I needed to use both of those things. She moved toward the door. I'd suggest not waiting past 3:30. She left. Evelyn stood alone in the East Wing bedroom with the document in her hands and listened to the estate breathe around her. The pipes, the old walls, the rain that had finally stopped and left behind it a silence so complete she could hear her own blood moving. She looked at the window. Dark outside. The formal garden below the balcony lying in wet darkness, the perimeter trees invisible in the moonless night, and somewhere beyond them a north gate with a code and a 30-minute window and federal investigators positioned outside a perimeter they couldn't legally cross until a warrant arrived. She had 6 minutes to decide whether to wait for the warrant or move. She crossed to the bedside table, retrieved the phone, opened the contact labeled electrician, and typed not called, too much noise risk now, a message. North Service Gate, code 7491. I'm moving in 12 minutes. Get someone to that gate. She sent it. Then she did something she had not let herself do at any point in the past 24 hours because it had no operational value and would have cost her the cold clarity she needed to function. She allowed herself, for exactly 30 seconds, to feel the full weight of what this was. Not the danger, not the logistics, the grief of it. 9 years. The man who had handed her a glass of something excellent and told her she'd been underestimated. The work that had been real. The mornings that had been real or had felt real, which in lived experience amounts to the same thing until it doesn't. She allowed herself 30 seconds and then she put it somewhere she would need to deal with later, because later was the only place she could afford to put anything right now. She pulled on her shoes, took the personal phone, took nothing else. The travel bag in the corner she left exactly where it had been. Signal of normalcy until the very last moment. She was at the bedroom door with her hand on the bolt when she heard it. A door opening. Not hers. The study. Below her and to the left, the specific heavy sound of the fire-rated cabinet. The same sound she had heard 2 nights ago from the staircase. She stood absolutely still and listened to Marcus moving through his study at 3:21 in the morning, taking something out or putting something away, preparing for whatever tomorrow was supposed to be. She unbolted the door. She stepped into the hall. And Marcus Reed was standing at the bottom of the staircase, looking directly up at her, fully dressed, with a stillness in his face that told her he had never gone to bed at all. In his hand was the oilcloth from the sub-basement. He had the documents. He had found them moved, a fraction of an inch, the evidence of her handling, and he had taken them. He looked at her on the staircase landing and said nothing. He simply held her gaze with the expression of a man who has just received the confirmation of something he had feared and is now operating in the space beyond fear, where the only things that exist are choices and their consequences. Evelyn, he said. One word, the same word he always used, and she had spent 9 years hearing it as shelter. She heard it now for what it was, a door closing. She had 23 minutes before the North Gate's next camera check. She had no way to get there except through the man standing at the bottom of the stairs. And behind her, the East Wing bedroom, and the drop from the balcony she had told Reyes was too high to survive, suddenly required a different calculation. She did not run. Running was what he expected. Running was what every calculation he had made about her predicted. That she would panic, that she would make a reckless move toward the front door or the main gate or some other obvious exit that his security already covered, and that he would intercept her with the patient authority of a man who has already thought 12 steps ahead of everyone in the room. She had spent 9 years letting him think 12 steps ahead of her. She stopped that now. She stood on the landing and looked down at Marcus Reed holding Thomas Greer's documents, and she said, with a steadiness that surprised even her, "You moved those yourself." He looked at her. "The oilcloth," she said. "The position was off by more than a handling shift. You moved it and reset it and waited to see if I'd go back for it." She held his gaze across the full length of the staircase. How long have you known about the tunnel? A pause. Something crossed his face that in another life she might have called respect. Since Greer put the access hatch in, he said, I had the combination set to a default open code because I was going to deal with the documents eventually. I kept waiting for the right time. The right time being after my name was on your legal instruments. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Marcus. Her voice was level. Her heart was running a different calculation entirely. Pure percussion, hard and fast against her sternum. But her voice was level and she needed it to stay that way. Whatever you're planning for tomorrow morning with Hargrove, it's over. People outside this property know where I am and what's in those files. He looked at the oilcloth in his hand. He set it on the hall table beside him with the deliberateness of a man who has decided the documents are no longer the operative problem. Who? He said. Federal investigators, she said. They've been watching this estate for 18 months, Marcus. They have the photographs I took this evening. The physical originals in your hand are evidence, not leverage. The hallway between them was very quiet. Outside, the post-storm darkness pressed against the estate's windows. She watched him process what she'd said with the rapid internal efficiency she had always admired in him and was now watching turn toward her like a weapon finding its angle. You've been working with them, he said. I've been protecting myself. Since when? Since I understood what protecting myself required. He moved. Not toward the front door, not toward her. He turned and walked with that controlled, deliberate stride toward the east corridor, toward the estate's security hub, the room off the main hall where the camera feeds and gate controls and alarm systems were centralized. She had 12 seconds before he reached it. She went down the stairs. Not running. Walking fast, with the kind of economy of motion that wastes nothing, because the balcony drop was 20 feet, and she had just revised her survivability estimate from impossible to painful, and painful was a category she could work with. She was back in the east wing bedroom with the door closed and the bolt thrown before she heard him reach the security hub. The French doors opened onto a narrow wrought iron balcony 6 feet wide. Below it, the formal garden stone patio was wet and very dark and very far, and she stood at the railing and looked down and felt the distance in her joints before she felt it in her mind. 20 feet. Her phone buzzed in her hand. Reyes. In position at North Gate, what's your status? She typed. Blocked from North Gate. Balcony east side. Can you reach East Garden? 3 seconds. Reyes. East Garden is outside our legal perimeter. We cannot enter until warrant executes. ETA 14 minutes. 14 minutes was nothing. 14 minutes was everything. She looked down at the patio. The rain had left the stone black and slick. The garden urns cast low shadows in what ambient light filtered from the estate's exterior lighting. There was a boxwood hedge along the patio edge, dense and squared, 4 feet high, not soft enough to break a fall, but structural enough to redirect one. She had designed that hedge placement herself, 3 years ago, when Marcus had asked her to redesign the formal garden's perimeter geometry. She had spec'd the boxwood at that height, specifically to create a visual boundary that didn't feel like a wall. She had built herself a landing zone and not known it. She heard the security hub door open below her. She climbed over the railing. The drop hit her like a fact, sudden and absolute and without any of the softness she had hoped for. Her feet caught the top of the boxwood, and her knees buckled into it, and she went sideways onto the stone patio with her right shoulder taking the impact and the breath leaving her body in a single violent expulsion. She lay on the wet stone for 3 seconds that felt geological in their depth, and then something animal in her. Some stratum of self that exists below decision-making, below language, below everything she had learned in 9 years of this house, got her upright. Her shoulder was wrong. Not broken, but wrong, a deep structural complaint that would need to be dealt with later. She filed it under later and moved. The north gate was 200 yards across the dark estate grounds. She knew this property in every light and season. She had walked these grounds in morning fog and July heat and the particular blue cold of Virginia winter, and she knew every gradient of lawn, every service path, every section where the groundskeeping team had installed drainage that made the turf soft and the footing unpredictable. She ran through the dark with her shoulder screaming and the wet grass grabbing at her shoes and Reyes's 14 minutes burning down. She was 60 yards from the north gate when the exterior floodlights came on. Every one of them. The full perimeter array, the pathway lights, the garden spots, the secondary lighting Marcus had installed along the fence line, all of it coming up at once, flooding the grounds with white light that turned the night into something that had no hiding in it. She stopped. She was fully visible, standing on the north service path with 60 yards of open ground between her and the gate, and she turned and looked back at the main house. Marcus was on the rear terrace. He stood without a coat in the cold night air, and he looked at her across the lit grounds with an expression she could read at 60 yards because she had spent 9 years learning his face. It was not rage. Rage she could have processed. It was something that had passed through rage and come out the other side into a territory for which she didn't have a single clean word. Grief and fury, and the specific devastation of a man who has built something enormous and is watching it come apart and cannot stop the momentum of it. "Evelyn?" His voice carried across the wet grounds with clarity. "Stop." She didn't stop. She turned and ran. She heard him come off the terrace behind her, not shouting, not calling security, just the sound of his footsteps on the stone steps and then on the path. And the sound was worse than shouting because it was so absolutely controlled. The pursuit of a man who has not yet decided what he will do when he catches her and is making that decision in motion. 40 yards. Her shoulder was a constant white noise of complaint. Her lungs were working hard and the cold air was sharp enough to feel like intake. 30 yards. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it without stopping. Reyes. Warrant just executed. We're coming through. And then she heard it. The north gate. Its electronic lock releasing with a sound like a held breath finally let go, and the gate swung inward, and through it came 3 figures in dark jackets with Federal Agent across the chest, in letters she could read from 20 yards, moving in the fast, controlled way of people who have been waiting a long time to move. She stopped at 10 yards because her legs made the decision before her brain did. Behind her, Marcus stopped too. The lead agent, not Reyes, a woman, compact and fast-moving with close-cropped hair and eyes that processed the scene in under a second, spoke first. "Marcus Reed." Her voice was professional and entirely without theater. "Federal warrant. Do not move." The estate grounds held very still. Evelyn turned around. Marcus stood 20 yards behind her on the north service path, in the white flood of his own exterior lights, with the oilcloth package under his arm, and his face doing something she had never seen it do before in 9 years of watching it. It was collapsing. Not dramatically, not completely. The structure of him was too deeply built for that, but at the edges, in the particular way of a man who has been holding a construction together by sheer conviction and has just run out of it. He looked at her. Not at the agents. At her. "I saved your life," he said. It came out quiet, not an accusation, almost a question. "You did," she said, and her voice broke on it slightly, and she let it, because the breaking was true, and she was through pretending that none of this was true. "And then you tried to make me pay for it forever." The agents were moving wide on either side, establishing position. Reyes had come through the gate behind them and was now angling toward Evelyn with his eyes doing a rapid physical assessment. "Are you hurt?" he said, low. "Shoulder," she said. "I'm okay." Marcus watched Reyes reach her, watched the agent position himself between her and the path back to the main house. And something that had been barely holding in Marcus Reed's face completed its collapse. Not into tears, not into any of the visible emotional currencies available to people in ordinary situations, into something quieter and more total. The expression of a man looking at the specific consequence of every choice he has made and understanding, with the clarity that arrives only when there is nothing left to strategize, that he made them. "Don't do this," he said. Not to the agents, to her. "It's already done," she said. He looked at her for 3 more seconds. Then he looked at the documents under his arm. She watched him calculate the value of running, the value of destroying what he was holding, the value of any of the remaining moves available to a man in a lit garden surrounded by federal agents at 3:40 in the morning. She watched him find no value. "Marcus Reed," the lead agent said again, closer now. Place the documents on the ground and put your hands where I can see them." He didn't move for a long moment that stretched itself thin across the cold air. Evelyn stopped breathing. And then Marcus Reed set Thomas Greer's oilcloth package on the wet grass of his own estate, with the careful precision of a man who cannot, even now, do anything carelessly. And he straightened, and he put his hands at his sides, and he looked at Evelyn one last time with everything that 9 years had been between them, sitting in his face with nowhere left to go. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said. She believed him. That was the thing she would carry out of Ashford Estate and into whatever came after. Not the surveillance, not the locked gates, not the legal documents designed to absorb her into his architecture. The fact that she believed him, and that it didn't change anything, and that both of those things could be simultaneously true. The world was full of people who caused damage without wanting to, who built cages out of genuine feeling, who confused love with ownership so completely that the distinction stopped existing for them. Marcus Reed was not a monster who had pretended to be a guardian. He was a guardian who had become a monster by increments, and the increments were the part that no one ever saw coming, least of all the people inside them. She had been inside them. She had the specific knowledge of someone who has lived a thing rather than observed it, and that knowledge was going to cost her a long time to process, and she was going to be paying that cost from the outside of this property. The agents moved in. Marcus did not resist. He stood with his hands visible and his face composed, and the last of his authority draining from him with the quiet efficiency of something structural giving way. And Evelyn watched it and felt something she didn't have a word for. Not satisfaction, not grief, not the clean release she had expected. Something that required more time than she had right now to examine properly. Reyes touched her arm. "I need to get you off the property. Can you walk?" "Yes," she said. "The package is evidence. The agents will secure it." "I know. Ms. Brooks." His voice held something that wasn't quite sympathy, but was adjacent to it. "We need to move." She turned away from Marcus Reed for the last time with the oilcloth on the grass behind her and the white estate lights burning and the north gate open in front of her, and she walked through it. The Virginia night was cold and smelled of rain and wet earth and the distant wood smoke of someone else's fireplace, and the gravel of the service road was real under her feet, and beyond the perimeter tree line she could see the parked vehicles of the federal team and the first colorless suggestion of a sky that was thinking about becoming morning. She had made it 40 feet beyond the gate when she heard it, from inside the estate, from the main house direction, carried across the grounds by the cold air, a sound that took her 2 full seconds to process, because it was not a sound she had ever associated with Ashford in 9 years of living inside it. Glass breaking. Then the particular low sound of something catching. She turned. The east wing windows, her bedroom windows, the French doors she had come through 4 hours ago, were lit from inside with a light that had nothing to do with electricity. Orange and violent and moving in the specific liquid way of something that has found what it needs and is not going to stop. Reyes had turned too. He had his radio up in one motion. "Fire in the main structure, east wing. I need fire response to Ashford Estate." But Evelyn was already calculating. The fire-rated cabinet in the study. It would withstand the fire. The documents inside it, the original financial records Marcus had been protecting for 15 years. The instruments designed to absorb her name into his empire. The full scope of his operational architecture. They would survive a fire in the east wing. A fire-rated cabinet was designed for exactly this. Greer's oilcloth package was already in the agent's hands. The fire was not destroying evidence. The fire was coming from her bedroom, where she had been sleeping for 6 years, where her travel bag still sat in the corner because she had left it as a signal of normalcy, where the French doors she had left open when she went over the railing were open still, feeding oxygen to whatever had ignited in that room. She thought of the candles in the dining room from dinner. She thought of Marcus in his study at 3 a.m, working before the attorney visit. She thought about the specific way fire finds open doors and follows them. "The study," she said to Reyes. "His study is below the east wing. If that fire reaches the study before your team can contain it, the agents are already moving agents into the structure," Reyes said. "Marcus's financial records are in a cabinet in that study. Physical originals. 15 years of documentation." Reyes looked at the burning east wing windows. He looked at her. He understood what she was saying, that the evidence inside that house, the complete picture, beyond what Greer had left in the tunnels, was in a room that was directly below a structure currently on fire, and that a fire-rated cabinet would hold against everything except a sustained structural collapse, and that the main house of Ashford Estate was a 100-year-old timber frame building that had been burning for 4 minutes. "How do we get to the study?" he said. She looked at the north gate behind her, at the estate she had just escaped, at the fire moving through her bedroom windows with the patient appetite of something that doesn't negotiate. She had been 40 feet free. "Follow me," she said, and turned back through the gate. She went back through the gate she had just escaped, and the gravel crunched under her feet with the particular sound of a decision that cannot be unmade. Reyes was a half step behind her, and 2 agents flanked them both, and the north service path stretched back toward the main house, with the east wing fire painting the sky above the roofline in colors that had no business being beautiful and were anyway. Orange and deep amber and the clean white core of something burning hot enough to be serious. The smoke was beginning to come down. The wind had died after the storm, and the smoke was dropping rather than dispersing, settling over the estate grounds in a low ceiling that smelled of old timber and everything she had lived inside for 9 years. She ran through it. The east wing was the right wing of the main house from the garden perspective, which meant the study was below it, and to the left, below the burning section, but connected by the internal architecture of a structure built in the 1920s with load-bearing timber framing and plaster walls and no fire suppression system beyond what Marcus had retrofitted during the first renovation, which she knew from the project records had been a sprinkler installation covering the primary living areas and not the administrative corridor. The study was in the administrative corridor. She had the floor plan of this house in her head, the way she had the plans of every property she had ever worked on, not memorized deliberately, but absorbed, the way the body learns a space it has moved through daily for years. She knew where every structural wall sat. She knew which floors ran over which ceiling voids. She knew the study's position relative to the east wing the way she knew her own hands, and what she knew was that the ceiling above the study was the floor of the room directly east of her old bedroom, and the fire had been burning in her bedroom for at least 6 minutes now. She went through the main house's rear service entrance, which Reyes held open, and the interior air hit her immediately, warmer than outside, thickening, the particular quality of air in a building that has fire in it, which is less about smell and more about pressure, a heaviness that the lungs recognize before the mind does. "Where?" Reyes said. "Left at the main hall, 3rd door." She didn't wait for him to lead. She knew the way. The main hall was clear. The smoke was concentrated in the east wing above them, and the hall itself was still breathable, though the emergency lighting had kicked on when the main power tripped, casting everything in the low red glow of battery-backed fixtures that turned the familiar space into something she didn't recognize. The portraits on the main stair wall, the console table with its arrangement of dried botanicals that Helena refreshed monthly, the grandfather clock that had been running in this house since before Marcus was born, all of it in red emergency light, all of it ordinary and strange at once, all of it burning in a building that was burning. 3rd door on the left. She pushed it open. The study was intact. No fire, no smoke penetration yet, though the air carried warmth that was above ambient, and the ceiling showed one long stress crack running east to west that had not been there last week. Above that crack, somewhere in the floor void, the fire was working. The fire-rated cabinet was against the east wall. Reyes was already moving toward it. "Combination?" "I don't have it." She looked at the cabinet, 4-drawer, commercial grade, the kind with a mechanical combination lock on the top drawer that controlled all 4. She had watched Marcus open it a handful of times over 9 years and had never seen the combination. He had always positioned himself between her and the mechanism, which she had noted without noting, the way she had noted everything she hadn't let herself examine. "We'll need to breach it," Reyes said, already on his radio. "How long?" "We have a unit with extraction tools outside, 3 minutes." She looked at the ceiling. The stress crack had widened since she'd entered the room. Visibly, a 1/4 inch of new gap running across the plaster with a fine powder of debris sifting through it. The sound above them had changed from the ambient roar of distant fire to something more immediate, structural. "We don't have 3 minutes in this room," she said. She picked up the chair from behind Marcus's desk. Heavy oak. It had been in this study since before Marcus inherited the estate. She swung it at the cabinet with everything her shoulder had left, which was not much. The impact sent fire up her arm and through her collarbone, and she made a sound she hadn't planned on making. And the cabinet rocked but held. Reyes took the chair from her without discussion. He was bigger, and both shoulders were functional, and he drove the chair into the cabinet's top drawer, housing 3 times in rapid succession with the focused repetition of someone doing arithmetic rather than destruction. On the third impact, something in the lock mechanism gave. Not dramatically, not with the clean drama of a lock breaking in a film, but the way real locks fail under impact, which is a partial collapse that jams the mechanism and makes the drawer movable by brute force. He wrenched the top drawer open. Files. Folders and hanging frames labeled in Marcus's executive assistant's handwriting, financial years, entity names, correspondence categories. Reyes swept the entire drawer's contents out in one motion, and the files cascaded across the study floor, and he was already on the second drawer when the ceiling above them gave its first serious sound. Not a crack, but a groan, the long structural complaint of timber that has been heated past its tolerance and is beginning to transfer load to adjacent members. "We need to go," one of the agents said from the doorway. "Second drawer," Reyes said. He got the second drawer. More files, and beneath the files, a series of bound ledgers with dates going back 15 years. The original handwritten financial records of the structure beneath the structure. The real accounting of Ashford Estate's operational history, the kind of documentation that could survive the destruction of every digital record if someone had been careful enough to maintain it in parallel. Marcus had been careful enough. He was always careful enough. It was the quality that had made him what he was, and it was going to be the quality that finished him, because his careful records were now in Reyes's hands. "Go," Reyes said. They went. The East Wing's floor gave way as Evelyn cleared the rear service entrance. She heard it from outside, a sound like a held note finally released, the structural surrender of a section of 100-year-old timber framing that had been fighting physics for 7 minutes and had simply exhausted its argument. The East Wing's upper story came down into itself with a concussive impact that pushed a wall of displaced air out through every opening in the building and hit her in the back like a flat hand. She was already clear. She went down on one knee on the rear terrace stone, caught herself on her good arm, and stayed there for 3 seconds while the sound finished and the smoke bloomed upward, and the cold Virginia night air pushed back against the heat coming off the building. Reyes was beside her. He had the files. His face was expressionless in the specific way of someone managing themselves very carefully. "You're clear," he said. "Can you stand?" She stood. Her shoulder had moved from complaint into the territory of serious structural objection, and her lungs were registering the smoke in a way they would continue registering for the next several hours, and her knees were communicating something about the balcony landing that she hadn't fully processed in the operational urgency of the last 30 minutes. She inventoried all of it and filed it. "Where is he?" she said. Reyes looked toward the north gate. She understood from his look that the agents who had taken Marcus Reed into custody were already outside the perimeter. "He's secure," Reyes said. "Was he—" She stopped, started over. "The fire. Did he set it?" Reyes looked at her with the measured expression of a man who has an answer and is deciding how much of it serves her right now. "We'll know more when the investigation completes," he said. "But yes, I think you know the answer." She did. She had known it when she heard the glass break. She had known it from the specific location of the fire, which was her bedroom, the room whose contents meant nothing to Marcus's financial records, and everything to the version of events in which Evelyn Brooks had been residing in his estate voluntarily, by her own free choice, without coercion, in the context of a private partnership that the legal instruments would have documented cleanly. Her bedroom burning eliminated a category of evidence. Whatever her space had held, her personal items, the receipts of her independent life she had been quietly assembling, any documentation of the surveillance and access restriction, gone. It was the move of a man who had run out of strategic options and reverted to the oldest one. Reduce the record, control what remains. He had controlled what remained for 15 years. It was the only language he knew for keeping things. She looked at the east wing burning against the dark sky and felt the specific grief of watching a place you love destroy itself, which is different from the grief of losing something to someone else's indifference. This was personal. The fire was personal. Marcus had said it the way he did everything. With intention, with calculation, with the conviction that he knew better than anyone else what should and shouldn't survive. She let herself feel that for exactly as long as the moment required. Then she walked through the north gate and did not look back. The next 6 hours happened in the organized chaos of a federal operation's immediate aftermath. The kind of hours that feel simultaneously endless and structureless, that exist outside normal time in the way that hospitals and courtrooms and disaster sites do. Places where ordinary chronology suspends itself because the stakes have temporarily overridden the ordinary architecture of a day. She gave her initial statement in the back of a federal vehicle parked on the service road outside Ashford's north perimeter, wrapped in a thermal blanket that smelled of industrial laundry and holding a cup of coffee that someone had produced from somewhere and that she drank without tasting. Reyes sat across from her with a recorder and a notepad, and the manner of someone conducting a process he had done many times. Thorough, not unkind, with the specific professional courtesy of a person who understands that the individual across from them has just been through something that will take considerably longer than this debrief to fully surface. She told him everything in order, starting with the email folder on her work computer and ending with Helena's knock at 3 a.m. She did not editorialize. She did not offer interpretations of Marcus's psychology or her own complicity, or any of the things that were already forming in the part of her mind she was keeping carefully partitioned for later. She gave him facts and sequence and let him do his work. It took 2 hours. When it was over, he closed the notepad and looked at her with the expression of a man shifting registers, from investigator to something more human, which she appreciated more than she had words for in that moment. "Thomas Greer," she said. "What happened to him?" Reyes held her gaze. "We believe he's alive. Pacific Northwest, which was what you were told. We've had difficulty locating him precisely. He's been careful, but his disappearance from the public record appears to have been voluntary rather than imposed. He got out and stayed out." She absorbed this. Thomas Greer had gotten out and left his documentation behind for someone who came after him, not knowing who that would be, only knowing that the evidence needed to outlast his own presence in Marcus Reed's orbit. A message in a bottle sent into an underground tunnel, addressed to no one and everyone. She had been the one who found it. She didn't know if that was luck or something more architectural, whether the whole thing had been moving toward this since Julian Hart's call in the spring, since the first message Reyes had sent through Julian's contact, since Marcus had first looked at her across a bar at a trade event and told her she'd been underestimated. She didn't know, and she recognized that the not knowing was something she would need to make her peace with, because the alternative was spending years mapping causes onto a sequence of events that had probably been, at its core, the ordinary, terrible chaos of people who want things making decisions that intersect with other people who want things, and the results being what they are. She asked Reyes one more thing before she got out of the vehicle. "Helena Marsh," she said. "She was involved in the surveillance, the email protocol, but she also—" "I know," Reyes said. "We'll talk to her. What she did tonight matters. It's going to be considered." She nodded. It was the most she could ask for. Helena Marsh had made choices across 11 years that had contributed to the machinery Evelyn had been living inside without knowing it, and Helena had also knocked on a door at 3 a.m. with a piece of paper in her robe pocket and a sister in Knoxville and whatever it had cost her to move from knowing to doing. Both of those things were true, and they were going to have to coexist in whatever accounting came next, the way all the true things were going to have to coexist. She got out of the vehicle. The sky to the east was the particular blue-gray of a morning that has already been decided. Not sunrise yet, but the hour before it, when the darkness loses its conviction and the world begins to reassemble itself from scratch. She called Dana. Dana picked up on the first ring, which meant she had not slept, which meant she had been sitting with her phone since Evelyn had told her Sunday and was currently somewhere in the 4th hour past Sunday. "I'm out," Evelyn said. The sound Dana made was not a word. It was something that existed before words, in the territory that language was invented to reach, and never quite manages. "I'm out, and I'm not hurt badly," Evelyn said. "Shoulder. I'll get it looked at. I need somewhere to go tonight. You're coming here, Ticia, Dana said. You're coming right now. I'll book you a flight. I need to stay in Virginia for a few days. There are... Evelyn. Dana's voice held the specific authority of someone who has been patient to the absolute edge of their patience and has decided the edge is where they live now. You are coming here. The federal people can reach you in Atlanta just as easily as they can reach you in Virginia. You need a bed and a person. Come here. Evelyn stood on the service road with the thermal blanket still around her shoulders and the dawn working on the eastern sky and the smell of smoke in her hair, and she said, "Okay." "Okay," Dana said. "I'll have coffee when you land. The real kind." Dana. "I know," Dana said. "I know. Come home." Bunty. She flew to Atlanta on a morning flight in the window seat with her shoulder wrapped and her hands in her lap and her face turned toward the glass for most of the 2-hour journey. Virginia fell away beneath her in the autumn colors she had been watching from Ashford's windows for weeks. The gold and rust of the hills, the dark thread of the river systems, the grid of roads connecting things to other things in the patient geography of a place that would continue being itself, regardless of what had happened on 94 acres of it the night before. The state looked unconcerned. States generally do. She thought about what she was carrying and what she was leaving. She was leaving 9 years. She was leaving the specific weight of a life that had been shaped by someone else's vision of who she should be, which had fit well enough for long enough that she had worn it like her own skin and only now, in the altitude and the morning light, could feel the difference between it and the actual thing underneath. She was carrying the work. This was important, and she needed to let it be important. The actual design work, the real projects, the things she was genuinely good at, which Marcus had not invented and could not own, and which had been hers from before he found her, and would continue being hers now that she had found herself again on the other side of him. Heart Solace had reached out because of her work, and whatever else had been layered on top of that approach, the work was the foundation of it, and the foundation was real. She was carrying the knowledge of what she had survived, which was not a small thing to carry, but which was... She was beginning to understand somewhere above the Virginia-North Carolina line, also not the weight she had expected. She had expected it to feel like damage. It felt more like information. The kind of information that reorganizes your entire understanding of a space from the inside. The way you can live in a building for years, and then one day someone shows you the structural drawings, and you understand, for the first time, what is actually holding everything up. She had been holding herself up the whole time. She hadn't known because the scaffolding Marcus had built around her had made it easy to attribute her own stability to the structure rather than to what was inside it. But structures fall, and she had been standing in the ruins of one for approximately 6 hours now, and she was still standing. That was worth something. She was going to find out how much. Mas, Dana's apartment in Atlanta was on the 4th floor of a building in the Virginia Highland neighborhood with the windows that faced east and a kitchen that smelled of the particular coffee Dana had been making since graduate school. Too strong and not sweet enough, and absolutely correct. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table with a mug between her hands and her shoulder freshly wrapped by an ER doctor. Dana had insisted on stopping at first, and she let the morning happen around her without doing anything to it. Dana sat across from her and didn't ask anything for the first hour. This was the specific gift that Dana Okafor had been giving people since she was 19 years old. The ability to be present without requirement, to fill a space without taking it over, to understand that some mornings are not for talking and to not require talking of them. Evelyn had almost forgotten what this felt like. She sat inside it and let it work on her. "He genuinely loved me," Evelyn said, finally, in whatever way he was capable of. Dana held her coffee mug and waited. "I'm not saying it to excuse him," Evelyn said. "I'm saying it because pretending it wasn't real would make everything I feel about it make less sense than it already does." She looked at her hands. "It was real, and it was also... what he built around it was wrong. The whole structure of it. And I lived inside that structure for 9 years and called it safety." "You were 26 when you met him," Dana said. "I know. You were in the worst year of your life." "I know that too." She looked up. "That's not an excuse for staying as long as I did." "It's not an excuse," Dana said. "It's a fact. Facts aren't excuses. They're just what happened. Evelyn looked at her. Donna Okafor had been her closest friend since their second year of design school, when they had been assigned to a joint project that should have created a rivalry and had instead created something more durable. And Dana had spent the subsequent 13 years being exactly this. The person who held the distinction between what happened and what it meant with more clarity than Evelyn was usually capable of in the moment. "I should have called you more," Evelyn said. "Yeah," Dana said without heat. "You should have." "He made it easy not to." "I know he did." Dana set down her mug. "And you let it be easy. Both of those things are true, and they're both going to need to be looked at, but not today. Today you drink the coffee and you sleep in my guest room, and tomorrow you call that firm in New York and you tell them you're still coming. The position is still yours," Dana said. "Julian Hart called me this morning." Evelyn looked at her. "He got my number from Reyes, apparently. He wanted to know if you were okay. He said to tell you the position has a start date, and the start date is flexible, and whenever you're ready, it's yours." Dana looked at her steadily. "That's what you built, Evelyn, not what Marcus built. What you built. And it's been waiting for you the whole time you were in that house." The morning light was coming through Dana's east-facing windows now. Real morning, the sun fully committed, cutting through the Atlanta sky at the low autumn angle that makes everything it touches look like it's been reconsidered. It fell on the kitchen table, and on Dana's hands, and on the coffee mug, and on Evelyn's own face, she supposed, though she couldn't see it. She thought about what it meant to start over, which she had done once before at 26 in the wreckage of everything, and which she was doing again now at 35 with the very different kind of wreckage that comes not from loss but from extraction, from pulling yourself out of a structure that has formed around you and learning to stand in open air again. Both were a kind of beginning. The first had felt like catastrophe. This one felt, if she was being precise about it, more like a door. Not a door Marcus had opened, not a door anyone had opened for her. A door she had found by going through a locked gate in the middle of the night and running across wet grass with federal agents at her back and her shoulder telling her things she didn't want to hear. She had found it herself. That was new. That was something she was going to hold on to. "Okay," she said. Dana raised an eyebrow. "I'll call Julian tomorrow," Evelyn said. "Tonight I'm going to sleep." "Good," Dana said. "Guest room's made up. I put the good pillows in." Evelyn stood and the morning light followed her across the kitchen, and she went to sleep in a room that belonged to someone who had chosen to share it with her, which was a different thing entirely from a room that had been provided. And the difference, she thought as she closed her eyes, was everything. The legal proceedings moved with the particular momentum of cases that have been building for a long time and are finally given room to run. In the weeks following the night at Ashford, Evelyn was called back to Virginia twice for depositions. Formal, structured sessions in federal offices that felt nothing like the estate and everything like the world that operated outside it. The ordinary world of process and documentation, and people doing their jobs with the unremarkable competence of systems that function whether or not any individual inside them is paying attention. She gave testimony that was precise and factual and complete. She answered every question without performance and without the practiced equivocation she had learned in 9 years of watching Marcus navigate rooms. Thomas Greer was located in Portland, Oregon, a fact that landed in her with a complicated resonance, given that Portland was where she had lived before everything fell apart, and where she had never imagined ending up again, and where apparently a man who had trusted the wrong person and gotten out ahead of the consequences had quietly rebuilt a life that didn't include Marcus Reed. He gave testimony remotely. She never met him. She didn't need to. His oilcloth package had said everything necessary. Helena Marsh cooperated fully and was ultimately not charged, a decision that Reyes communicated to Evelyn with the matter-of-fact neutrality of professional information delivery, and that Evelyn received with something that surprised her. Not anger, not relief exactly, but a kind of exhausted understanding. Helena had been inside the same machinery she had been inside. Helena had made different choices, worse choices, for longer. But the machinery was the same, and the machinery was Marcus's. And whatever Helena had been at the beginning of her 11 years at Ashford, she had ended it by knocking on a door at 3 in the morning with the only useful thing she had left. Evelyn had made her peace with that. It had taken approximately 3 weeks and several long conversations with a therapist in Atlanta, whom Dana had recommended with the specific insistence of someone who had been waiting to make this recommendation for years. The therapist's name was Dr. Marcus Webb, which created a minor internal complication that the therapist herself had found, when Evelyn mentioned it, dryly amusing. "Does the name bother you?" Dr. Webb had asked in their second session. "It did the first time," Evelyn said. "Now it just reminds me that the world is smaller than it looks, and also full of people named Marcus, who are nothing like each other." "That's a reasonable thing to know," Dr. Webb said. It was. There were a lot of reasonable things to know that Evelyn was in the process of learning or relearning or learning for the first time because she had been prevented from getting to them before. The difference between protection and possession. The difference between gratitude and debt. The difference between a mentor who wants you to become yourself and a mentor who wants you to become the version of yourself that needs him. These distinctions were not complicated in the abstract. In the specific, in the daily texture of a life lived close to someone, they were easy to miss and hard to recover once missed. She was recovering them. It was slow and non-linear, and occasionally she woke at 3 a.m. with her shoulder aching and the specific quality of the dream that set in the east wing bedroom of a burning house. And she lay in the dark of Dana's guest room, or later her own apartment in Seattle, and let the dream recede and reminded herself where she was. She was in Seattle because Julian Hart had offered her the position, and she had taken it, and the position was headquartered in New York, but had given her the option of establishing the Americas Creative Office in either New York or Seattle. And she had chosen Seattle for reasons that were both practical and personal. The distance from Virginia, the quality of the light, the city's particular character of people building new things in a landscape that had not been there long enough to calcify into hierarchy. She found a 1-bedroom apartment in Capitol Hill, on the 3rd floor of a building that was nothing like Ashford and was the best thing she had ever lived in, and she arranged it herself, slowly, with the specific pleasure of someone furnishing a space that belongs entirely to them. She chose everything, every surface, every texture, every piece of furniture. She chose the rug for the living room, a vintage ushak in pale gold and ivory that she had found at a market in Pioneer Square on a Saturday morning when she had nothing to do except wander and look at things she might want. And she arranged it herself, moving it 3 inches east and then 2 inches back, and then deciding it was right where she'd put it in the first place, which was a decision that took her 15 minutes and which she made with the unhurried satisfaction of someone who has no one else's opinion to account for. She bought plants. This was not something she had ever done before. At Ashford, the ground staff managed the living things, and the interior plantings were Helena's domain, and before Ashford she had been 26 and in emergency survival mode with no room for anything that needed regular attention. She bought 4 plants for the Seattle apartment. 2 she was told were difficult to kill, 1 she was told required some effort, and 1 she chose purely because she liked its shape and decided the maintenance requirement was her problem to figure out. The difficult one died within 6 weeks. She bought another. The work at Heart Solace was good. This was the simplest and most important thing about her new life, and she returned to it often in the quiet hours as a kind of anchor. The work was good. The hospitality renovation in the meatpacking district that had been waiting for her was ambitious and technically demanding, and the client was exacting in the way she had always responded to best, the kind of exacting that came from genuine aesthetic commitment rather than status performance. She flew to New York for site visits twice a month. She built a team in the Seattle office. She published 2 pieces under her own name in the first 4 months and received, for the first time, the experience of professional recognition that arrived entirely without an intermediary. Julian Hart proved to be everything his phone manner had suggested: steady, direct, generous with resources and autonomy, the kind of collaborator who gave you room and trusted you to fill it well and told you when he thought you were wrong without making it personal. He was also, she learned over months of working lunches and project calls and the incremental trust building of professional life conducted at close range, someone who had known Thomas Greer well and had spent years watching what Marcus Reed's orbit did to people, and who had made his approach to her with a deliberateness that she had initially found, when she understood its full context, complicated. She told him so, in a direct conversation she had initiated because the alternative was carrying it around indefinitely. "You used me," she said. not as an accusation, as a statement of fact requiring acknowledgement. Julian had held her gaze across the conference table in his New York office and said, "Yes, not in the way you may be imagining. I didn't create the job offer to create leverage. The position is real, and I believed you were the right person for it before I knew who you were to Marcus. But when I found out, I made a decision that your presence in his house was relevant to what the investigators needed, and I communicated that to Reyes. I should have told you that from the beginning." "Yes," she said. "You should have." "I'm sorry," he said. And then he added, because he was honest in the specific way of people who mean it rather than perform it, "I told myself I was protecting you from information that might have changed how you acted and put you in more danger. That may have been true. It was also convenient." She looked at him for a long moment. "Don't do it again," she said. "I won't," he said. And they had gone back to work, because the meatpacking district renovation had a structural issue on the third floor that needed her attention, and the work was what she had come for, and Julian Hart was good enough at what he did that the complicated thing and the professional respect could coexist, which was a thing she was learning about the adult world. That coexistence of complicated things was not a compromise or a settling, but often simply the accurate description of what relationships between real people actually are. Marcus Reed entered a guilty plea on 14 counts of financial fraud, obstruction of justice, and criminal conspiracy 8 months after the night at Ashford Estate. The plea agreement was the result of a negotiation she was not party to and did not ask about. She knew what she needed to know from Reyes, which was that the physical records from the fire-rated cabinet and Thomas Greer's oilcloth documents constituted evidence substantial enough that proceeding to trial would have been, in the assessment of Marcus's own legal team, inadvisable. She read about the plea in the news coverage, sitting at her kitchen table in Seattle on a Tuesday morning with the pale October light coming through the east windows and a mug of coffee in both hands. The article had his photograph, a recent one, from a court appearance, Marcus in a dark suit looking at the camera with an expression that was not quite the expression she remembered from 9 years of mornings in the breakfast room, and not quite the expression from the estate grounds in the floodlights, but something between them. Something that had passed through the extremity of both places and arrived somewhere quieter. She looked at the photograph for a while. The feeling it produced was not simple enough to name. She had stopped trying to produce simple feelings about Marcus Reed approximately 4 months in, on the advice of Dr. Webb, who had gently observed that the therapeutic goal was not the reduction of complicated feelings to simple ones, but the development of a spacious enough internal landscape to hold them without being organized by them. She was working on that. The landscape was bigger than it used to be. She kept expanding it. She closed the news article. She finished her coffee. She rinsed the mug and left it on the drying rack and picked up her bag and went to work. The day that mattered most came in late November, 5 months after Ashford. It was a deposition-related meeting. The last one, as it turned out, the final evidentiary session before the plea formalized and the case moved into sentencing. She had flown in from Seattle the night before and stayed at a hotel in D.C. that was clean and anonymous and cost a reasonable amount of money that she was paying with her own salary, and she had slept well, which was not something she had taken for granted since it had become true again. The meeting was in the Federal Building on Constitution Avenue, and it was unremarkable in its conduct. Professional, procedural, an hour of documentation and signatures, and a formal closing of the investigative record as it related to her testimony. Reyes was there. He looked, if she was reading correctly, like a man who was several days away from a vacation he had earned. When it was over, he walked her to the elevator and said, "We got convictions on behalf of the associates who were defrauded in 2017 and 2019. Restitution proceedings are in motion." "Good," she said. 3 of the former business partners contacted the Victim Services Office, he said. "Your testimony was cited specifically. What you found in those tunnels is what made the difference." She looked at the elevator doors. "I almost didn't go back in," she said. "When the fire started, I was 40 feet free and I almost kept walking." "I know," he said. "I was there." "Why didn't you stop me when I turned around?" He looked at her with the expression of a man choosing precision over comfort. "Because you knew that building better than anyone, and because the evidence in that study was the difference between a case that holds and a case that gets picked apart on appeal for 20 years. He paused. And because I think if I'd stopped you, you wouldn't have forgiven yourself for letting it burn. She thought about that. She thought about the version of herself who had kept walking through the north gate, who had gotten in the federal vehicle and watched Ashford burn from the outside and preserved herself completely, and let the evidence take whatever chance the fire gave it. That version of herself was cleaner and simpler and had a less complicated shoulder. She did not wish she were that version. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For calling me in the first place," she said. "Even through Julian, even indirectly." She looked at him directly. "I needed someone outside that house to know what was in it. You were that." The elevator arrived. She got in. Reyes held the door for a moment. "What happens now for you?" "Seattle," she said. "I have a project." "Good," he said. And then, because he was fundamentally a practical man in the way of all the best people she had encountered in the past year, he let the elevator door close, and she went down to the lobby and walked out into the November afternoon. Check. The Heart Solace America's creative office had its inaugural client event in the first week of December, in the Seattle space that Evelyn had chosen and renovated and opened with the particular satisfaction of a project that is also a statement about what the firm was, about what she was, about the specific quality of work that she intended to produce, and the standards she intended to hold it to. The space was in a converted warehouse in South Lake Union, with 16-foot ceilings and concrete floors she had polished and stained to a particular warm gray that caught the light differently at different hours of the day. The north wall was glass, looking out over the lake in the low winter light. She had furnished it with a combination of pieces she had sourced herself and work by Pacific Northwest makers whose aesthetic she found rigorous and unsentimental, the kind of design that didn't ask to be admired and was all the more admirable for it. Dana came up from Atlanta for the opening. She arrived at the office on the afternoon before the event and stood in the middle of the main space and turned around slowly with her hands in her coat pockets and said nothing for a full minute. "Well?" Evelyn said. "This is yours," Dana said. Not as a compliment, as a recognition, something being acknowledged that was already true. "Yes," Evelyn said. "It is." The event itself was low-key by the standards of design industry openings. 40 people, good wine, the kind of ambient conversation that happens when professionals who respect each other's work are given a well-designed room and something decent to drink. Evelyn moved through it with the ease of someone who has finally found the version of professional life that fits the actual dimensions of who she is. Present without performance, engaged without calculation, wearing her own authority in a room she had made rather than one she had been admitted to. Julian flew in from New York. He stood beside her at one point, looking at the north wall's view of the lake, and said, "Is it what you wanted?" "It's the beginning of what I want," she said. "Which is better?" He nodded, slowly, in the way of a man who understood the distinction. Later, when the event had wound down and the last guests had gone and the staff were straightening chairs and collecting glasses, Evelyn stood at the north window alone and looked at Lake Union in the winter dark. The water was black and the city lights were working on its surface in the patient way of light on water, scattered, imprecise, beautiful in a way that required no architecture. She thought about what she had come from and what she had come through and what she was standing in. She thought about the girl at 26 on a friend's couch in Virginia with her business gone and her parents gone and the floor gone, who had been told by a man with excellent taste in wine that she had been underestimated. She thought about what it had cost to find out that the estimation in the end had been his own. She thought about what it meant to estimate yourself, to be the one who looks at your own dimensions and says, "This is what I'm worth, and this is what I'll settle for. And this is the line I won't cross," and hold those positions across time, across pressure, across the specific weight of a person who needs you to be smaller than you are, because your full size threatens the shape of what they've built. She had been smaller. She was not being smaller anymore. The therapist had asked her in one of their later sessions whether she had forgiven Marcus Reed, and she had sat with the question for a long time before she answered it. "I don't think forgiveness is the right frame," she had said. "Forgiveness implies I'm doing something for him. I'm not interested in doing anything for him anymore." "What are you doing then?" Dr. Webb had asked. She had thought about that. "Releasing him from being the organizing principle of my life," she said. Which is a thing I'm doing for me, not him. That feels different. It is different, Dr. Webb said. It was. She had been practicing it. She was getting better at it. There were mornings still when she woke and the weight of Ashford sat on her chest for the first 30 seconds before she breathed it out and opened her eyes and found the Seattle morning and the plant on the windowsill and the evidence of a life that was hers in every particular. Those mornings were getting fewer. The 30 seconds were getting shorter. She was not healed. She was healing, which is a different and more honest verb. She stood at the north window of her office, and the lake spread out below her in the December dark, and somewhere across the water, the lights of the city were doing what city lights do, marking the places where people live their complicated, ordinary lives, full of choices that will become the past, full of presents that are happening right now, full of futures that don't know yet what they are. She had a future that didn't know yet what it was. She was no longer afraid of that. She turned from the window, picked up her coat from the chair where she had left it, and walked to the door of her office. She turned off the light. The room went dark behind her, and the lake was still there through the glass, and she left it to its own darkness and went home. She had work in the morning. For the first time in a long time, that sentence contained no dread in it at all, only the simple forward motion of a person who knows what she is doing and where she is going and who made that knowledge herself, out of the specific materials of everything she had survived, which turned out to be more than enough to build with. The door of Heart Solis Americas closed behind her with the clean sound of something well-made settling into its frame. She walked out into the Seattle night, and the cold air came to meet her, and she let it